Welcome to video number 3 for Chapter 12, The Second War for Independence and the Upsurge of Nationalism. The sectional balance was very precarious during this time period. The tensions between the North and South over the West was revealed in 1819 when Missouri petitioned for statehood. The Tallmadge Amendment had been proposed, which would have said that no more slaves could have been brought into Missouri and would have proposed gradual emancipation of the children that were born to slaves that were already there. But the Tallmadge Amendment does not end up getting passed. With the proposal of that amendment came a roar of anger from slaveholding Southerners, who saw the amendment as a threat to sectional balance and the entire future of slavery. If Congress had abolished the peculiar institution, as they called slavery, in Missouri, it might do so in the older states of the South. A few Northerners protested the evils of slavery and were determined to prevent its spread into the territories. Henry Clay is the one who broke the deadlock with 3 compromises. In Congress, he proposed to admit Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, which would keep the balance between the North and South. He then proposed the line called the 3630 parallel that prohibits slavery north of the line and north of the southern boundary of Missouri. So this is a map showing the Missouri Compromise over slavery in 1820. Missouri was entered into the Union as a slave state, while Maine was entered as a free state, and slavery was made illegal by the 3630 parallel, which is the line here stretching through the southern part of Missouri through the Louisiana Territory. The Missouri Compromise lasted for 34 years. It was a vital formative period in the young republic, and this compromise preserved the compact of states, but also exposed the divisive issue of slavery in the West. The Missouri Compromise and the Panic of 1819 should have hurt President James Monroe's election in 1820, but Monroe ended up receiving every electoral vote except for one because the Federalist Party was dying off and was too weak. This is a picture of how they built the Erie Canal, which was built, it's an artificial waterway that was built through upstate New York from the Hudson River to the Great Lakes, connecting the Atlantic Ocean and the Atlantic seaboard through the Old Northwest. John Marshall, who's Chief Justice of the Supreme Court during this time period, ends up making a series of court decisions that end up being termed judicial nationalism. So the Supreme Court bolsters nationalism during this time period, which means that it's increasing the power of the federal government over the state governments. In the court decision McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819, the decision strengthened the U.S. government at the expense of the states. In the court case, Maryland had attempted to destroy a branch of the Bank of the United States by imposing a tax on its notes. John Marshall declared the bank constitutional using the doctrine of implied powers or loose construction. This increased federal authority when Marshall denied the right of Maryland to tax the bank. The next court case is Cohens versus Virginia in 1821, which gave Marshall another opportunity to defend federal power. The Cohen brothers had been convicted by Virginia courts of illegally selling lottery tickets, but they appealed their conviction to the Supreme Court, and the court ended up upholding the conviction. Marshall asserted the right of the Supreme Court in this decision to review decisions of state courts in all questions involving the powers of the federal government. That is the right of judicial review. In the court case Gibbons versus Ogden in 1824, New York State granted a monopoly of waterborne commerce between New York and New Jersey to a man who owned steamboats. Marshall asserted that the Constitution conferred on Congress alone the control of interstate commerce, and so the state was not allowed to grant the monopoly. And this struck a blow at states' rights while upholding the sovereign powers of the federal government. Marshall also protected property rights in the notorious case of Fletcher versus Peck in 1810. The Georgia legislature granted 35 million acres in the Yazoo River country near Mississippi to private speculators. Next, the legislature canceled the corrupt transaction. But the court decreed that when you grant a contract, you have to abide by it, and the Constitution forbids states from impairing or changing those contracts. So this protected property rights against popular pressures. Fletcher also enabled the court to assert the right to void state laws conflicting with federal constitutional law. In Dartmouth College versus Woodward in 1819, the college sued when New Jersey changed the charter that had been granted to the college by the king in 1769. Marshall ruled that the original charter must stand because it was a contract, and the Constitution protects contracts against state encroachments. Dartmouth's decision safeguarded businesses from domination by states, but it also created a future problem for when corporations escaped very much needed public control. If Marshall was the molding father of the Constitution, then Daniel Webster from Massachusetts was the expounding father. He expounded nationalistic philosophy and challenged states' rights and nullification. Marshall's very nationalistic decisions shaped U.S. history. They buttressed and supported the federal union, created a stable national environment for business to grow, checked the excesses of the elected state legislatures, and shaped the Constitution along conservative centralizing lines counter to the emerging democratic spirit of the era. Through John Marshall and his decisions in the Marshall Court, Hamiltonians partly triumphed because their philosophy and their belief in terms of government lived on through him. And we'll continue to discuss these issues of the Marshall Court and the Missouri Compromise of 1820 in our classroom discussions.